Very warm welcome to our Neogen webinar on learning how to overcome biosecurity challenges during the winter months on a poultry farm. I'm Grace and I'm the marketing coordinator for animal safety at Neogen, and I look after Europe, Middle East, Africa and India. So during this webinar, audience members can ask questions and we're able to put it directly to the panel, or we'll be able to answer it afterwards. The webinar is expected to last for around an hour, and afterwards it'll be available on demand and you'll get an email to know when the recording is ready for viewing. So to introduce our panel, we have Tony Pearson. He is our technical support manager for Neogen here in the UK. And then we also have our poultry farmers joining the call today. So Rick and Dave Venables, who farm Holly Tree Farm. So hi, Tony. Is it okay if I call you Tony or is it Anthony?
No, all good. Typically, customers in Europe call me Tony. In the Middle East, they call me engineer, and in Asia, I'll be in Asia next week. They call me Dr. Anthony, although I'm not a doctor. So,
thank you for joining us today. So, would you please be able to share your experience with the audience?
Sure, Grace. Well, I've been in the animal production, biosecurity, hygiene, specializing in pathogen control now for about 35 years. 33 years was with one company, and I joined Neogen about a year ago. I've been working globally, so I engage the winter in the North and the Southern hemispheres. Luckily enough to have been on farms in over 70 countries, actually. So I can now share those experiences, tips and ideas, with the permission of the creators, of course, with farmers here in the UK and in Europe.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thanks, Tony. So hi, Rick and Dave. Thank you for also joining us today. Can you share your experience with the audience as well?
So we're poultry farmers just in Cheshire. We have about 14,000 laying hens. Half of them are free range, half of them are barn. And we retail all the eggs ourselves off the side of the road at the farm here, so we don't have any contracts or anything. So we are looking to expand again shortly to go to about 20,000 birds, because we're always short of eggs. So we are also a mixed farm. We have sheep and beef as well, so that's what we do.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So we have just around 50 minutes together. So we'll get the questions from the audience. But firstly, can I ask each of you what you feel are additional challenges in the winter months for broiler production and egg-laying chickens in particular, but as well as poultry in general?
Well, bird flu is our major issue this time of the year. We're concerned, with letting the birds out, but there doesn't seem quite as much bird flu this year. The only other challenge is very cold days when we're releasing the birds out, but up to now this year, we've coped fairly well.
And you, Tony?
Well, Grace, I guess one of the biggest challenges in the winter, really, we sort of feel that the dark mornings and the dark nights, and I'm sure the guys agree when they're getting out there at 5 in the morning and it's still black, and they come in at night, it's still black. That sort of really compounds the problems, because we're doing a lot of the essential work is being done in the dark. For example, cleaning out the housing, even, letting the birds out, letting the birds in, all that type of stuff. Placing chicks with broilers, all the doors are open, it's cold mornings, you've got to choose your times. Controlling the ventilation, especially what we've noticed the last year or two, the inconsistent temperature. So I was in Rochdale yesterday, it was like 7 or 8. I'm in Essex today, and it's not going to go above freezing. So you've got quite a risk there of different pressures of air. And as Dave mentioned, the avian influenza risks, they always come this time of year because of the migrationary aspect of that. The global climate change has adjusted their flight paths a little bit, but still we're getting them, H5N1, and now quite a lot of H5N8 as well. So those, really compound the issues, and we get respiratory challenges pretty much the same as the humans do during the winter periods. So it's really quite a challenge. And then, of course, and the guys will be aware as well, the rodents are looking for feed sources. So they also become an extra challenge during the winter.
Okay, thank you. So when you give the example of cleaning our housing, please can you be more specific?
Yeah, well, it's sort of a political thing, so I'll try not to upset anyone at the same time. But with broiler production and specifically more than the layers, because the layers are not cleaning out quite as regularly, the broilers are cleaning out 7 production, even sometimes more per year. And they have a standard operating procedure. But of course, when you have a dark morning and a dark night, the guys are there in the dark, literally. And then some clever person will come along and say, you missed a spot, and they get pretty upset, and things start to evolve from that. For the layer flocks, of course, they don't clean out quite as frequently. Breeders as well, depending on the pullet system. Many of the farms actually here engage, when I say here, I mean in the UK, engage contract cleaners. And their task obviously becomes very difficult, and it's lousy. You know, you're pulling those pipes up in wet weather. It's much more different than it is doing it in June, July, and August, even though the temperature might be too hot. And it corresponds with a short turnaround period. I think for the layer flocks, you've got more time. You have 10, 12 days sometimes. But I was on a farm last week. They were told that they had 2 days to clean and disinfect, which, to be honest, isn't physically possible. And so, you know, that really creates a challenge. It happens, you know, with the production slows down. We saw it a lot during COVID when there was less people working in the processing plants, so the processing got behind, so the broilers stayed on the farm longer, etc., etc. So you really get that challenge. And of course, in the wintertime, some of the typical chemistries like glutaraldehyde, quaterimonium compounds that are used in many products, they don't work in cold temperatures. They need temperatures above 20 degrees to work effectively. So at the same time as we're getting more challenges, we're perhaps using chemistry that isn't getting to the heart of the problem. We see that with the DEFRA guys. Most of the farmers look at DEFRA. You can see disease of poultry, you get one dilution, salmonella, you get another dilution. And that's all done at 4 degrees centigrade. So go by those guides, because you know, they're specifically done there to help the people. What else I can say about the cleaning? Well, really, you know, it's a choice. We have resistance to chemistries. I don't want to get too technical. You know, I can go into that in more detail on a farm-to-farm basis. But don't forget also the drying times are shorter. You know, if you've only got a short turnaround, you've got a cold day outside, the floor may never actually get dry. And then you're going to put bedding down and then birds on top of bedding, and you're going to heat the house 35 degrees. So pretty good bacteria buffet going on there just before you replace the birds. So there's a lot to do. And these create the challenges. It's not that there's more, it's just that the conditions are difficult. I know from our point of view, we're bringing back an old favorite, farm fluid, to try and overcome these typical problems, because that's an upgraded phenotype of chemistry that works with organic matter and even does protozoas. So, you know, we can help and we can adjust. But yeah, sorry, that's quite a lot.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot of
on.
information to unpack. Please, could you talk a little bit more about the ventilation?
That's a tough job all the year round. We saw last summer, you know, temperatures up to 35, 36 degrees. Keeping the building cool was the problem. Now it's heating it is the problem. I'm sure for the guys, you know, we're looking at the layer flock, especially those going outside. We're trying to keep the houses between sort of 18, 22 degrees, you know, that sort of temperature. And with the price of fuel these days, you know, that's not easy. It's a bit of a mixed match. One of the main things with a controlled house is to make sure it's sealed properly. I mean, the best way to check that is if you have a contractor that's doing thermal fogging, or you're doing it yourself, just go and have a look where the gas escapes, where the fog escapes. That's pretty much where you haven't got the building sealed. And that's a good tip for where to make sure you do get it sealed for the help with ventilation and that type of thing. So it's, you know, there's too many buildings to give you a specific answer, Grace, I think. You know, you've got the tall buildings with the high spans now with 30 to 50,000 birds. You've got as Rick and Dave were saying, they've got birds inside, they've got birds outside. You know, you really need a specialist to come and sort that out. When I was farming back in the 80s, we had a plastic sock that went up the building. With a tunnel ventilation. I don't think people use those too much anymore, and they're very difficult to clean. But you know, today I see little vents in the side of the house trying to cool the air that goes up. So it's really, I think, to answer your question specifically, you need help to judge that. But the farmers should get that. You can get it from the breeders, you can get it from Cobb, you can get it from Aviagen. They've got specialists that will come round, because even the birds have different temperature factors to consider. So in short, a well-insulated, well-sealed roof is great. The heating system sufficient to maintain, obviously, the capacity and the temperatures. Minimum ventilation system. And one really good thing to know is the prevailing wind direction. So you've got positive pressure from the prevailing wind and negative pressure from the leeward side, which means where the wind's going away. And I've seen some farms built recently that don't look like they considered wind direction. And that's difficult. You know, you've got urbanization and finding space to put a new farm. The guys said they're expanding, so you know you're going to probably have a planning permission and 3 neighbours that say that's going to increase flies. You have to get past all those little challenges. But yeah, I think it's a complex question. Sorry, I can't answer specifically. I can by house and by farm, but I think in generalization, make sure the ceiling is good and those other factors.
So do these challenges line up to your management considerations for the winter too, Rick and Dave?
Yeah, well, with having a brand new house, basically 2 years old, it's exceptionally well sealed. It's got 3 intake fans and 3 outlet fans. So there's no actual side vents, so we don't have to worry too much about prevailing winds. We find that the barn side is easier to control. We can keep the litter very, very dry, whereas with the pop holes, when they open, it does release, it lets so much outside air into the shed, even though the fans that extract the air switch off during opening hours, so as the air is being pushed out rather than being pulled in as well at the same time. So, but we find, we do find all in all that a well-sealed unit, when it is absolutely completely sealed up, works exceptionally well, and we don't have any issues with wet bedding or what was I going to say about we don't have any problems with what's the word? Can't think of the word now. Go on, you take over.
Yeah, well, basically, yeah, we don't have any damp. With it being quite a new building, that is our beauty. Yeah. Whereas, I suppose we have got one older unit that we're still running, and if there's sort of any issues, that's sort of the shed that's going to give the issues, because again, the ventilation's not as good, yeah, and things like that. Which that's the reason being to why we're going to hopefully expand and go further and have another shed and get rid of this one, because now we've had a new shed on part of the farm. The management side and everything to the new shed is far easier, yeah, and everything. The birds are healthier as well. The birds, yeah, are happy. They lay better and everything else.
Yeah, less corn.
Thank you.
So that's okay, don't worry. That's okay. That's normal for the farm. Don't worry.
Just gonna let her out. Get rid of her. The other. Let the dog stop. Get out, dog. The other thing we find is with the new shed, we don't get any vermin. And vermin's a massive thing. Like before, we were on Liberty livestock sheds with flat deck systems. And rats were just a big problem. no matter how much you try and get up on top of vermin, it's a difficult situation you're in, because they've obviously always got fresh feed to feed on. So the other big thing for us has been vermin. With the vermin control is we've sort of eradicated it almost. It's fantastic. So yeah, so it's good really.
So I guess that's with the sealed building, as you mentioned. So Grace, that's sort of like you asked the question, does it align? I think it does. And what Rick mentioned about the older shed, of course, if you haven't got it sealed, you've got temperature fluctuation. That's why the birds are eating more corn, and their metabolizable energy is going into keeping warm, not giving him the eggs that he needs to sell by the side of the road. So that's all relevant. Although we're not here to get a commission or promote new buildings, but it sounds like new buildings is quite a way to go. Yeah.
Well, we going back to the feed on it as well. We're probably feeding 145 grams of feed a day to again eradicating that down to about 125 grams. So again, it's the ventilation. It proves ventilation is key.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. So another question that was sent in is, face what feels like many challenges, we resort to the most dangerous formalin for a final disinfection applied as a fog. We know that the safety has to be good so that the teams have full kit. What else would be good? Tony, can I ask you this one?
Wow. Yeah, that's another political question. Yeah, formalin has often been referred to as the belt and braces application. It is a chemistry that's called a chemistry for substitution, but I started farming back in the 80s and people are still using formalin today, and we were told not to use it back in the 80s. So it really is the sort of the chemistry. It's known not to be very safe, as the person asking the question mentioned, because of the lingering gaseous phase. So if you do use that type of chemistry, you can't go back in the house after you've used it for quite some time. And very often you'll see a farm will have to, especially in the short turnarounds, open the ventilation to let the gas out, which cools the building down, and then you've got to heat it back up again. So it's quite a challenge. So is it a good chemistry? Yes, it is. It's a good biocide. And as a thermal fog, it really has that smokiness that sort of gets to all the places that you need to. It does need warmth. If the building isn't up to 20 degrees centigrade, even that chemistry is not going to work very well. The aldehyde specifically needs that. And preheating the houses these days, again, is very costly. So I would have thought, a liquid solution probably would be as good. So the client asks, or the questionnaire asks, what else? Again, thinking about those short turnaround times, gosh, if they could be managed better, then the hygiene would have more time. Maybe you wouldn't need a belt and braces because you could do everything quite clearly with residual chemistry being the better option. That'll give a bacteria static, and by that I mean glutaraldehydes, quaternary ammoniums. They could be used as a thermal fog. Certainly, the focus we have very often is the birds are on the ground, so we're concentrating everything around the floor areas and maybe a meter up the wall. But going back to the ventilation, don't forget that the hot air rises, so there's quite a lot of bacteria up in the roof. And if we don't get the fog up there, ideally with a residual chemistry, because that will give us a bacteriostatic effect, when you do turn on your ventilation, that comes back down, which is why we very often see, not sure with the layer side because that's constant, but with the broilers, the ventilation's probably coming on day 12, day 14, and by day 17 we're seeing more problems. That's probably because the bacteria has come from the ceiling down to the ground. Doesn't answer exactly, but formalin, yes, it's not a bad chemistry, but you do have to be very safe with it. Wear the protective wear, I guess that's what he meant or she meant by full kit. Full kit means a respiration kit, fully covered. Don't go back in the building for 48 hours. That can also be costly, 48 hours of no production. So think about a glutaraldehyde or a quaternary glutaraldehyde, even better. And also phenolic is a good option. Phenolic chemistry, because its robustness, also fogs very well. I saw there was a team from SK Poultry recently got a really nice fogging machine, so they can do it quite quickly. I haven't been to see it physically yet, but I saw it online and I spoke to Mr. Kenworthy about that. So there is equipment there to help as well with other chemistries. So yeah, formalin, if you're going to use it, be very, very careful. And don't forget that is going to cause a downtime in production. From a Neogen perspective, I should probably tell you what we have available for that. So we have a Synergize, which is a quaternary glutaraldehyde, which is great, and that will, with the residual chemistry, will have that bacteriostatic effect. And also, as I mentioned before, we're bringing back farm fluid, and you can thermal fog that, and that's another option. I'll be happy to talk to the customer more about that if they want to.
Thank you, Tony. So Rick, do you resort to formalin sometimes, or what are you using at the moment?
No. We washed the shed out for the first time back in July, August time. And beginning of August. So we just used general disinfectant, didn't we?
Just a general one.
Steam clean, pressure washed all the system off, and then just sprayed a disinfectant over it after. Again, we weren't allowed in there for 24 hours after. Yeah. But that was just a general disinfectant.
Yeah, it sounds like that was probably a glutaraldehyde type of chemistry. If you weren't allowed in for 24 hours, I imagine.
Yeah.
And that gives you a residual. So what that does, guys, it'll give you a residual content on the concrete surface. The semi-porous surface will have some residuality of that chemistry until it biodegrades. So 10 or 12 days of like a bacteriostatic effect.
Yeah, and obviously it's all quite new to us because some people said to us, "Oh, dry clean it off and disinfect," and so it was all quite new for us this time. We'll probably look into it a bit more this next time, what chemicals we do actually use.
Well, you've got a good contact now, haven't you? So
Okay, so it's all right. So our next question from the audience. So we are all trying to use less antibiotics these days, and many guides tell us that the disinfection products are long-lasting. How long is long-lasting, and can they really carry on protecting the birds? Tony, this sounds interesting. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, good one. Absolutely about the antibiotics. So since 2014, I think, the legislation came in that people should use less antibiotics. And according to the Vet magazine a couple of weeks ago, the 2022 was the least by antibiotics used in the UK since that came in. So for the last 8 years. But that also has to coincide with better management practices. As Rick and Dave said, the new building, they're obviously getting less challenges in the new building. So, those are the management tools that sort of help in that. Is it disinfection long lasting? Yes, in so much as it depends how you view that. If you're thinking of the environment and you said, is it biodegradable? If it's long lasting, it can't be biodegradable. So if it's or it's slower to biodegrade. So a company might just say it's long lasting because it's not biodegradable. But in a semi-porous surface or a porous surface, yes, you will have a residual effect of the application that you've applied from chemistries such as glutaraldehyde, quaternary ammonium, iodine, phenolics. They're all what we would call a residual chemistry because they will reside in the concrete pores for up to 10, 12 days until they biodegrade. They're not biocidal in so much as if you have applied a product, for an example, at a 1% dilution, what is left residing in the concrete is no longer 1% because you've used up some of the capacity. But it will have a bacteriostatic effect. And formaldehyde as well to some extent. The non-residual chemistries are monoposulfates, hydrogen peroxides, peracetic acids. You apply those, and as soon as they're dry, they're gone. There is no residual effect of those. So, does that really help? I think in Rick and Dave's case, it probably, helps for the first few days when they put the birds in there, the same as it does for broilers. Because remember, we're heating that house up to 35 degrees when we place broiler chicks, sometimes 37, depending on your breeds. It depends where those birds came from in the point of lay, which means were they from week 27 or week 67, or people don't go quite as long as that, perhaps 52. They are of a different standard or a different health status very often. And you've got so much happening in that first week. Very often a hatchery will say that's the responsibility of the farm, and the farm will say that's the responsibility of the hatchery, because it's the chicks have just come from them. But that first few days, if you've got that bacteriostatic effect from residual chemistry, I think that is good. It will help. It's not a medication. So if you get a challenge, you've still got to make some sort of a treatment. So it's residing for sort of 7 to 10 days. And I think that's what most of the literature will guide from the labels.
So that's protecting the birds.
As I said, protection is a bit of a stretch. It's certainly a benefit to assist reduce the bacterial replication in that first week. Of course, the chicks have got maternal antibodies that first week as well. Everything sort of comes to an end at the same time. The residuality will finish around day 10, day 11. The maternal antibodies will also finish around day 10, day 11. So, it's a help. It's definitely a help. But like I said, after 10 days, there's not really anything going on. In the UK, we don't do certain things that we do in other parts of the world. In other markets, we have a way of reducing the pathogen pressure if there's, for example, a respiratory challenge in that first week or the first 15 days, whatever. They can actually apply a chemistry to try and reduce that in the house. Again, it's not a medication. It's just a way of trying to reduce pathogen pressure. In our case, of course, that's a Neogen peroxide super type product sprayed 2 meters above the birds, and that reduces the pressure. It's not disinfecting. So I think, the veterinarians are the ones to really guide on this sort of area. If there's a challenge, the birds have to be treated. You can't ignore that. But certainly we can do better management, use residual chemistries, have new buildings, as Rick and Dave said, better ventilation. You've got better health, and that's certainly going to help.
So, Rick and Dave, are you using probiotics or any other methods to reduce the pathogen pressure?
No, not at the moment. We're not. No, at the moment everything seems to be healthy. So if all's well, we just leave it alone.
I mean, we very rare we do ever have any issues, but if we don't ever had a challenge, the old buildings, you got the old challenge and the old buildings sort of thing. But
yeah,
up to now we've been totally fine with where we're going. Yeah.
So I think that it's really great. It's more of a trend. So as Rick was saying, they sort of expect something might happen in the older building, but the newer building is not happening. So probably when you do come to that disinfection again at the end of that cycle of the old building, it may pay to do something with residual chemistry in there, just as a thought, to drive that forward.
So it looks like we might be running out of some time. So Rick and Dave, can you summarise for us, are you ready for winter?
Yeah, we're ready for winter. Yeah, I mean, we don't change a lot in what we do because we're very family run based. So it's only really me and Dad that go into the birds anyway. We don't really let any staff or anything in there. We only have one member of staff anyway, but generally it's only us two that go in the birds anyway, which is quite good. We obviously disinfect feet before we go in, and we change wellies then before we go into the birds, and we just try and do everything we can to minimise sort of any disease going into the birds. And obviously last year was a massive probably wake up call with bird flu being as bad as what it was, and we were extra keen then. But I think we sort of just carried on the routine from that. We haven't really let it slip that much. And I think that's quite important. And once you get into that routine of doing something, it's just like an everyday thing, isn't it? It's, so that's where we're quite, we I think we're winter ready.
So did you have to keep the birds in when because I think DEFRA was recommending keep them in, wouldn't they? Yeah.
I think it was from about the 18th to 20th of October last year through till end of March this year, wasn't it?
End of April.
End of April.
End of April it was.
That's a lot of.
It was 5 months. I think we had an odd month where we had to sell everything as barn eggs. We had to change the codes.
Okay. Yes.
But,
I think probably everybody had to do that then. Yeah, because there's
well,
also
it wasn't just us. It was the whole,
the whole industry.
The whole industry.
There is, I mean, you mentioned there the boot dips, and that's great. Also, if there is, again, if the migration does come in your direction again, if you sprinkle agricultural lime around the outside of the houses, that changes the pH of the environment, so the virus won't survive. So avian influenza really, the H5N1 and even the H5N8, they're more or less looking at a stability of around 4.5 to 9 pH. So it doesn't mean you can't inactivate them either within that range. It just means that they're very unstable outside of that range. So just sharing an idea what we do in Asia and particularly in China as well. They sprinkle the agricultural lime all around the outside of the building, changes the pH of the environment, and it's quite cheap. It's not too expensive. So if the birds do come and defecate in that area, the virus won't survive. Just as a side tip, really.
If we sprinkle outside pop holes.
It just said, do you sprinkle outside of the pop holes?
Yes. So basically, you can either use an acid or an alkaline type of product. I tend to use agricultural lime because it's readily available and it's cheap. And basically changing the environment reduces the longevity of a virus challenge. It doesn't prevent it. I mean, the defecation will still come, the bird will still come there. And the challenge, of course, with the outside birds is there's bits of feed all over the place. So, it's like they're flying past and they think, oh, there's a motel. I'm just going to pop down there and have a bit of food. And before a bird takes off, you very often see it defecates. I mean, it makes sense, to be fair. It's lighter when it takes off. So that's typically what happens and leaves the stuff behind. But that will not survive in a lower acid or a high alkaline environment.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, interesting that.
So, Tony, are you ready for winter?
Personally, no. I'm going to Asia. So I'm going to Vietnam tomorrow to see some customers over there, and it's 32 degrees. So I'm 0 here today in Essex, so I'll be quite happy with that. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, it is a really tough time. Here in the UK and across Europe, we will expect avian influenza coming probably at the latest January. You can't avoid it because the bird migration comes every year. It moves slightly, and I think that might be something to do with global warming. If you politically believe in that, or if you don't politically believe in that, they're still coming further north than they were before. So something is driving them that little bit further up. So we did get the H5N8 challenge across the south last year. It didn't reach Cheshire. That was still H5N1, I believe. So we have to be prepared for that. We know it's coming. And that's the time to make sure, you've got product available, you've got the boot dips ready. Rick and Dave, it's quite simple. There's nobody coming to the farm, so they don't have the challenge of people wandering around and all that. Very difficult if you've got a farm where there's a public footpath going through it. That is a nightmare because all sorts of people are wandering around and dogs and cats and things. So from a winter's perspective, you've really got to try and have time in a broiler section for cleaning out the houses. There's nothing replacing the clean and disinfect to reduce that pathogen pressure at the end of the cycle. So it's about teamwork. That's what I always say. Some of the large operations and integrators, they've got teams with multi-skill sets. They probably have a ventilation expert. They probably have a biosecurity expert. Rick and Dave are all of those wrapped into one, as well as feeding and selling the eggs by the side of the road. So, every farm is going to be different. When we think of the veterinarians, when we think of the nutritionists, it's really working together and thinking about the winter, making sure the buildings are sealed. The rodents are definitely going to be more active. Rick mentioned new building, less rodent, well, no vermin problems. So this is a big challenge, because over the last 3 or 4 years, the bait that is available to us has become pretty innocuous. I mean, it's probably quicker to go out there with a hammer and hit them on the head, although politically I shouldn't say that, but it's very difficult to find a bait that is going to target the rodent. But professional companies come out, they can help, of course, and we have to make sure that that's carried through. It's all part of, as I said, working together as a team. And when we come to the winter, don't forget that chemistries need warmth when you think about glutaraldehyde and quaternary ammoniums. So think about rotating that chemistry. Rick mentioned they cleaned in July. No problem. You can use practically anything in July. You're going to have temperatures around 18 to 25. And we must remember, it's not just the temperature of the air, it's the temperature of the water with which you make the chemistry solution. So I'm pretty sure now the groundwater in Yorkshire, for example, is probably 6 or 8. So by the time you mix up the product, put it into a building which today is around 12 degrees, it's not going to work as well as we think. So you could increase the dilution or rotate the chemistry. That would be a typical support in that. And always make sure you include the contract cleaners in your decision process, because there's no point telling somebody to do something if they haven't got the equipment to do it. There is a particular chemistry, I'm not going to go into it politically, but has been advised, and it doesn't come out of the boom. So the contract cleaners are ringing us and saying, what can they do? And we politely explain to them that's not ours, that's somebody else's. So maybe ask them what you should be doing, because it's crystallizing as they try to apply it. So again, you've got to make sure that everything works together. But going to your original question at the beginning, it doesn't matter whether you've got broilers, layers, turkeys, breeders. You've really got to work together as a team. The poultry is all going in the same direction. We're all trying to reduce antibiotics. The winter, the metabolizable energy, if we don't have those buildings controlled, the birds, they don't produce. They just eat and sustain themselves, which is what they should do. But, you have to have different management skills at that time of year. And don't forget, you can always ask the breeders. As I mentioned before, they've got great experts. Cobb is based here, I think in Essex, actually. And Neogen as well. We've got the Scottish team. They can come and help with the ventilation, help with the birds, give you advice. Don't feel isolated. It's nothing wrong with reaching out and saying, guys, I've got a challenge, help. We're not an isolated island, or we shouldn't be. I learned that over the last 33 years. I'm just here to help, because it's great that we can share experiences around the world, like the agricultural line. I hadn't seen anybody do that in the UK. I brought that idea back from overseas, and even the folks in Brazil doing this, replacing the formalin with an aldehyde during the cycle. We wouldn't dream of doing that, but they can do it very safely, and they really do a very good job. So, yeah, it's been nice to meet Rick and Dave, and I'll come and have a cup of tea one day, hopefully. Next July, when you disinfect it again, I'll pop by.
We are actually we're doing one just after Christmas, actually.
Oh right, okay.
Come and see us sooner rather than later.
that might be that. Yeah, of course, because it's winter time. I will be in. I'm in Chile in February, but I will be around in January time. So.
Yeah. January, we wash down again on the shed, beginning of January. So yeah,
that's great. Okay, Grace.
Yeah, I think that might be all the time we have for questions this evening. So I'd just like to thank Tony, Rick and Dave for their time and their expertise. So this webinar recording will soon be available on demand, and you'll also get an email to let you know when it's ready to be viewed. I hope that the time you've invested this evening has left you with a greater understanding of the topic and given you some food for thought on how to proceed with the choices that you're making in your business. So on behalf of the panelists and myself, a huge thank you to all of you for joining us this evening, and good night.
And also a thanks to Farmers Weekly for arranging, Grace.
Oh, yeah.